antagonists. So seeing how all these sentient beings are the same as ourselves and wishing to have happiness and be free from suffering. Yeah, and then in whatever way is authentic for you, generate the motivation to personally eliminate all faults in our actions of body, speech, and mind, and obscurations, especially of our mind. And then cultivate all positive qualities of wisdom, compassion, enthusiasm, mental focus, and so forth, all the way up to the culminating in a state of full enlightenment, in order that we can use our lives to be of the greatest benefit, not only to ourselves, but primarily to other sentient beings. Mm. So try to generate a bodhicitta motivation, thinking that in order to be of the greatest benefit to sentient beings, to work to free them from suffering and establish them in lasting well-being and happiness. Therefore, I'll engage in this session. And then especially begin to consider, because this session is about His Holiness the Dalai Lama's commitment to protecting the natural environment, the climate, and the wider environment that depends upon the climate. Then why that's why that's meaningful and significant in relation to the well-being of oneself and others, and the actualizing of the Buddha nature, the potential for enlightenment of oneself and others. And then we can recite these some verses of prayer that His Holiness usually recites at the beginning of an event. Yeah, so once again, first there's this verse of praise of Shakyamuni Buddha, composed by Nagarjuna, and then the Buddha's own summarization of his own teachings, and then a short mandala offering, and then the verse of refuge and bodhicitta. So if you like, you can visualize His Holiness the Dalai Lama or Shakyamuni Buddha in the space before you, and generate the mind of refuge in them, or faith relating to them. Compelled by great compassion, you taught the sacred Dharma to dispel all wrong views. To you, the Buddha Gautama, I pay homage. Do not commit any unwholesome actions. Engage in perfect wholesome actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. And a short mandala offering, we can just offer in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all transmigratory beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kamiratayami. And then the verse of refuge in Bodhicitta. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections from explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I am enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections from explaining the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So today is I think the fifth class in this series of, yeah, talks about His Holiness commitments, His Holiness different commitments in his life in honor of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who celebrated his 80th birthday this year. So again, for a long time there was four main commitments of His Holiness, and then in the later years, he's added a fifth one. So in relation to just being a human being and being therefore being a citizen of human beings on this earth, then His Holiness has a commitment of universal responsibility and secular ethics, seeing that as something that, and you can say universal human values in a broader way. Yeah, so seeing that, trying to find a basis for or clarify what are human values that bring about peace and happiness in our lives that apply to all people, regardless of whether they're religious or not religious, or whatever religion they might have. And then, in dependence upon His Holiness being a Tibetan, then he especially has a commitment to upholding and preserving Tibetan culture, especially as the Tibetan people are suffering under oppression by the communist Chinese government since 1959, and many are in exile and experience persecution. So we discussed that, I think, last week. And then third commitment, as a religious leader, His Holiness has a commitment to harmony between the different faith or religious traditions, and is committed to promoting interreligious kind of dialogue and understanding. I think that's what we spoke about last week, as I recall. And then the fourth, because, and here, this is what we're speaking about this week, is His Holiness' commitment to promoting protection of the natural environment that we live in. And that's in his role, largely, well, usually His Holiness speaks about in his role as, on the one hand, as a global citizen, because we all depend upon and enjoy the environment, the natural environment, but also as a Tibetan, because Tibet is the source of, I think, the 10 major rivers of Asia, the Yangtze River and the Yellow River in China, the Ganges River and the Indus River, and the Brahmaputra rivers that flow through India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. All these major rivers that provide the people of Asia. It's like over 3 billion people of Asia, almost more than a third of the planet's population, with fresh water. They originate in the glaciers in Tibet, this high plateau of Tibet. But also, I think, when His Holiness speaks about his commitment to preservation of the natural environment, he also speaks about just his role as a Buddhist practitioner, then as someone who's, from a child, has learned, in dependence upon his Buddhist faith, to care for and treasure the natural environment. So that's what we're speaking about this week, and then next week we'll speak about this fifth commitment that His Holiness spoke about more or yeah, in the later part of his life to as an exile in as a person living in exile in India. Um, so then his commitment to contributing something back to the Indian population and Indian culture, and then also as a leader of Tibetan, as a Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Of course, the Buddhism all arose from India. Um, so his commitment to, um, what do you say, kind of restoring and um, I don't know, resurgence, not quite the word, but um, kind of rejuvenation is probably a good word of the ancient uh, Indian psychology and philosophy, right, and practices and teachings associated with that. So that's what we'll speak about next week. So yeah, so this week about His Holiness commitment to the natural environment. Um, yeah, yeah. Like I said, maybe elaborate on that first. As a Tibetan, in his role as a Tibetan, then because Tibet is very high plateau, then it contains many glaciers. Sometimes it's called the third pole of the world. Um, there's the South Pole and North Pole. But then after those, I mean, in the South Pole and North Pole, there's massive glaciers and bodies of ice, land. In the South Pole, land, the Antarctic is covered with ice up to a mile thick in some places. And then in the North Pole, there's Greenland, and then the glaciers of the North Pole that form mainly in the winter. Um, yeah, so those are the two largest repositories of fresh water in the world. And then the third is Tibet, right? Because Tibet's such a high and vast plateau. Then it has, I think His Holiness, I saw an article I was reading recently. He said it has 46,000 glaciers in Tibet. Yeah, I was quite surprised at the number, 46,000. That's a lot of glaciers, right? So it's the third largest repository of fresh water in the form of ice sheets in the world. And then, yeah, and it's the source of 10 major rivers in Asia. And what that means is, as long as there's ice sheets there, then in the majority of the months of the year are cold, winter months, when the temperatures below freezing. So whenever precipitation falls, it mostly falls in the form of snow and sleet, and then builds up. Ice builds up, like so for thousands and thousands of years. Then the buildup of ice and snow has been quicker than the melting of it during the summer months, right? During the warm months, and so this, as it builds up, then it creates a huge mass of fresh water in the form of ice, and then all throughout the year, but especially in the summer months, then that gradually melts, and then as it flows down, it forms into streams and rivers, and then provides fresh water for people, all over Asia. And I've seen this a lot because I lived in India for so many years. Then as you travel, especially in North India, like when you're in Dharamsala, you come down to the Kangra Valley, and clearly it's like the whole valley is just nourished by meltwater coming from the glaciers. There's even some glaciers just in the mountains. What is it? Dal Dal Dala Range or something. I forget, the Daldura Range or something like that. Just behind Dharamsala, there's a range of mountains with glaciers. And just in the 25 years I've been going there, I've seen them getting smaller and smaller. It's very obvious. Um, they're shrinking. And then also, even down to Delhi, like during the pandemic, you could see photos from Delhi where even from Delhi you can see the snow caps of the Himalayas on a clear day. I mean, the only clear day in Delhi is when there's a pandemic and nobody's driving. Nobody's driving around for months at a time. It's so polluted, but it was so shocking. From the India Gate, in Delhi, you can see the Himalayas because it's not that far actually, and the Himalayas are huge, right? But especially, I mean, from the Punjab all the way over into Pakistan, then where the Indus River flows down into Pakistan, then all across the northern India, all the way to Calcutta, like in the far east. It's a massive plain. It's amazing. Takes you like 48 hours to go across that whole plain by train, and it's just field after field after field. It's like all fields, And all those fields I mean, many of those fields are irrigated, right? And all that irrigation water comes from the melt off from the Himalayas, right? And the Himalayas are just on the edge of the Tibetan, on the southern edge of the Tibetan plateau, right? Then beyond that, yeah, it's the plateau itself, where rivers flow down further to the east towards Afghanistan, and then or further to the west towards Afghanistan, and further to the east to China, all the way to Korea, probably. Um, so, and that's 3 billion people. That's a huge number of people. So, one thing His Holiness pointed out is if those, if those, it's predicted that at the current rate of global warming, if we keep polluting the atmosphere with carbon dioxide at the rate we are, that those glaciers will melt by 2050, right? Which is not long. It's just 25 years. And so you try to imagine if those glaciers really melt. I mean, it's hard to know exactly because it's something we never experienced before. But well, what will that mean for those rivers, right? Um, but definitely it'll be a lot less water in those rivers. There's no question. And then if there's less water in those rivers, what will that mean for the livelihood of people along those rivers and their ability to stay where they are, right? So that's one of the huge, I think, dangers of climate change is that, yeah, people can no longer live where they are. Then they have to leave and then go find another place to live. And that leads to a lot of conflict, right? Because, yeah, I mean, everyone has limited resources. And then when new people come and use those resources, I mean, we can see it's a huge, I mean, in the United States, in Europe, this whole issue of immigration and what to do about immigrants. Because when people feel like it's very difficult for them to make a living already, and then there's new people coming to that land, then they easily generate resentment, and it easily leads to, yeah, to a lot of problems, including violence and warfare, right? Yeah, so that's a serious uh, danger that there could be. Wars in the future. It said some say in the past wars were about oil primarily. In the future, wars will be about water. Um, I know once in where I lived in South India, most of us we get our drinking water, our fresh water from wells, from bore wells. That most of the we individually dig. There's also a communal kind of water system, but it provides very little water. So most people, that's not enough water. Um, But then the water table is going down and down and down gradually, right? Every year, there's people in the monastery, around the monastery, people, and it's not only the monastery, also the farmers and the Indian villagers in the area. As people get more wealth, more and more people have enough money to build a bore well. Because like in the villages in India, it's kind of the option between if you get government water, oftentimes they'll only pump fresh water for like 2 hours a day at some public spigot where everybody, all the houses in the area, say there's 20 houses in that area, they all send someone to hang out for to hang out for 2 hours a day and get in line and get water, and then they come away with maybe 30 gallons of water that they carry back to their house and use that till the next day and hope that the water's pumped the next day. And it's not reliable now. There's many things in India. It's not. So as people get more, are more have more money, then of course those who can afford it, they dig a well, right? They dig their own well. And then the farmers also dig wells to water their fields. But what that means is all those more wells drawing from the same aquifer, same water table. So the water table goes down and down. And then India is so dependent on the drought, I mean, sorry, on the monsoon, that if a monsoon fails, which it does sometimes, then the water table even goes down lower because people are using just it's not the aquifer is not getting replenished. So early on in the time I was at Sarah, one time for like I don't know 2 or 3 years, the drought was I mean the monsoon was very light, and so some of the bore wells started running dry. And so I remember our neighboring monastery, Sarah May, their wells that provide water for the entire monastery, they ran completely dry. So they had to start buying water from someone else. But it's very scary feeling to be, I mean, our well at our house, it didn't run dry. At Sarajay Monasteries, didn't run dry, but even at Koban House, where I lived for some time, it was very difficult to draw water out. I think they even bought some water for a few months. Um, but it's a very scary feeling. Probably, I mean, I'd never experienced that until that time, to be in a place where, all of a sudden, okay, one area they're not getting fresh water, and like that's what's coming for you if monsoon fails again and rain doesn't come. And then you quickly imagine, well, what if, in this whole wider area, there's no fresh water? Very quickly, like people have to move, like people have to go somewhere else. And then where do you go? And if the neighboring people know that that's a danger for them too, right? Then they don't want you there. They don't want you drawing on their fresh water, right? So yeah, when you start to imagine what that's like for rivers to run dry, fresh water to start running out, it's a very scary thing, And because okay, oil is a bit of a luxury, right? It's what powers our engines, but water is a necessity. It's an absolute necessity. So your instinct to, you know, to get that at any cost kicks in much stronger, right, than with oil. Oil is more like an issue of prosperity and convenience, luxury. Water is an issue of survival. Just so yeah. So that was a real eye opener, or for me, and then to relate back to His Holiness observation and his commitment to preserving the environment, as yeah, as I mean, as it's very much connected to maintaining world peace, right? To maintaining lack of conflict and peace among and harmony among people. Um, yeah. So yeah. Then also you can think another. Then as a Buddhist, I think the way His Holiness speaks about having concern for the environment is being concerned for all sentient beings, not just human beings, but for all sentient beings, because we share this environment with countless other animals, from small insects up to whales, that and elephants and so forth. That that in the Buddhist view, they all have consciousness like us. They all have a stream of consciousness like us, and therefore they all experience suffering, and they have the potential, and they experience happiness and well-being. And so, and they have the right to those just as much as we do. And even within Buddhism, in the Mahayana view, they are, just by virtue of having a consciousness, they have the potential for enlightenment. They have the potential to take rebirth as a hell being, and they also have the potential to eventually become enlightened, just as human beings do. And so we have and as human beings, we have greater intelligence in this rebirth than animals do. And actually, and as human beings, we're the ones causing this climate crisis. Like there've been other climate crises in the past for different reasons. If there's it's theorized there was a huge meteor that struck that caused the dinosaurs to become extinct, or there's been massive volcanic eruptions in the past that fill the atmosphere with dust and so forth. So there have been major extinctions of species on Earth in the past, but this one it clearly is caused by human activity, right? By humans extracting fossil fuels from the ground and then burning them, and thereby emitting all this carbon dioxide that was sequestered from the atmosphere by plants over millions and millions of years. And then as they decomposed and turned into coal and oil, then all that carbon dioxide was sequestered in the ground. So now in a very short time, we're extracting all that from the ground and burning it and releasing it in the atmosphere again, and realizing it has this tremendous greenhouse effect. Yeah, which traps heat, the sun's heat in the atmosphere, and then so causes the whole atmosphere to warm up, and including the world's oceans, which are, in a way, because they're liquid, they're the greatest. They're a much denser store of heat, of energy in general, and heat in this case is the main one. Than the air, right? So once the world's oceans like heat up to some degree, it takes a long time to cool down. So yeah. So, but as a Buddhist, though, we should be, not to say we're all Buddhists, but this is from His Holiness perspective. Um, we should care about and have as much concern for the lives of others, including all the trillions and trillions of animals that inhabit the planet, as we do for ourselves and our own species. Um, and recognize that when we pollute the environment, then it has a direct impact on the lives of not only other human beings, but other species. So both we should try to have equal concern for ourselves as for others as we do ourselves, right? Both other humans and other animals, and recognize that we all share the global and the natural environment of planet Earth together, and then use it in with that recognition, and use the resources that we use day to day that all come from the furniture we use, the buildings we live in, the electricity we use. Of course, when we drive our cars and use anything made of plastic or metal or wood or whatever, all those resources come in dependence upon the natural environment. So when we destroy the natural environment, then, and here it's drawing more on the view of dependent arising. Like as human beings, we're completely dependent on the natural environment. So I'm sure this is nothing new to all of you, but just a reminder. Um, and yeah, kind of maybe a helpful way to think about is that when we pollute the natural environment, in the long term, we're harming ourselves. So drawing on this from this Buddhist perspective of um, our having responsibility to other sentient beings, to treat them as we ourselves would want to be treated, and then also the view of dependent arising, right? That we're, um, as sentient beings inhabiting this planet, we're completely dependent upon the planet, and it's important to recognize that, and therefore care for the planet. And then also, you can bring in future generations, right? Future generations of human beings are also dependent upon, their quality of life, um, you know, is dependent upon our actions now. So if we pollute the environment now, then that'll have long-lasting detrimental repercussions for future generations of not only humans but also animals that inhabit the planet. Mm. So yeah, so as we have understanding of that and make choices as individuals in our daily lives, we make choices about what we consume and how we consume. It's important to um, take that into consideration and try to tread more lightly, have a smaller carbon footprint, um, and a smaller kind of not only carbon, also methane, right? But have a smaller footprint on the earth, right? And so there's a lot of small things we can do from, I mean, I don't need to list all these. I'm sure you've heard them from other sources, but things like using less electricity where we can, if we're able to invest in solar, using solar power as just speaking, or if we can buy an electric car instead of a fossil fuel powered car. I was just speaking with a friend when I went hiking with recently, who, yeah, he's buying a new house and putting enough solar powers on the house that everything in his house can be electric. He can heat the water with electricity. The heating and cooling is electric powered, and it's all powered by his car. He has electric car, so everything will be powered basically by sunlight that falls on his house, on the solar panels on his house. Um, of course, he has quite a lot of money, so he can do that. Not everybody can do that, but um, but even small things, even like most of us have retirement accounts. We save money for retirement. You can make choices about what you want to invest your money in. Like, don't try to avoid investing in fossil fuel companies or companies that support the fossil fuel industry, and rather invest in. There's a lot of investment funds that are green focused now. You can try to make your money available for startups, or startups are a bit risky, but even more established companies that are building green technology, solar panels, and wind farms, geothermal, even nuclear energy, or whatever. There's a whole green economy, and the more investors show support for that economy, it helps it grow and helps. Now we're kind of at a tipping point where, in many cases, renewable energy is becoming just more cost efficient than using fossil fuels, which that's That's probably one of the main things that could um, kind of save the planet, is if renewable energy is actually more affordable, if it becomes economically um, kind of advantageous to use renewable energy versus fossil fuels, like that will really lower the use of fossil fuels very quickly. Um, and then another thing, which His Holiness also promotes is because, at this kind of critical juncture in human history, when we're, coming closer to different tipping points where it's, if we warm the climate to such a degree, it's not sure, like, if those tipping points, if and how or when they'll ever be reversed, if they switch, like the jet stream, right? The flow of the jet stream around the planet. If that breaks down, so the air doesn't flow that way anymore, like what's going to happen? It's a total unknown. Or probably the most famous one is I think it's called the North Atlantic um, turning current. I don't know the name, but there's a current of water in the oceans, primarily in the Atlantic Ocean. But that's what drives the jet stream, and that's like what keeps England from being just like Greenland, basically, from being really cold. And then what keeps the West Coast from being uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, definitely the flow of the currents along the west coast, they modify the environment here. It's what makes it not too hot in the summer and not too cold in the winter, right? Versus like Eastern California. Um, yeah, so it's not sure. Not That's another tipping point, is the flows. The other, I mean, the ocean currents. Another is coral reefs. Like the ocean is warming and becoming more um, acid acidified. I think if that's a word. But such as the coral reefs are dying out. It's not sure, how that will affect the other ecosystems and the survival of other species of fish and so forth in the oceans. Mm, mm, yeah. So this is different um, tipping points. But what one thing I was getting to is, in order Mm, to reduce the greenhouse effect of gases that we're putting in the atmosphere. Actually, the methane is kind of the low-hanging fruit. Methane is one of the ones, because it doesn't last very long. It's like something like 20, 25 times more powerful greenhouse effect than carbon dioxide. But whereas carbon dioxide, once you put it in the atmosphere, it lasts for a very long time. Um, tens or hundreds of years. Whereas methane, it doesn't last. It degrades, and its greenhouse effect dissipates very quickly. So if you stop putting methane into the atmosphere, then it reduces the greenhouse kind of cumulative greenhouse effect of pollution in the atmosphere very quickly. And one of the largest causes of methane is cattle production, right? Because cattle produce huge amount of methane gas. Um, yeah, I've seen in some places. I mean, also, I mean, human waste also produces methane gas, but I've seen in some places where some places in India, they put the like manure from cattle, and I think also humans, in like a vault, and then have just a pipe going out to the stove, and you can fully fuel a gas stove in a kitchen just on, like 10 cows or something like that. Um, so, so to reduce, I mean, most cattle production in the U.S., of course, is for meat, consumption of beef. So just eating less beef, it really helps the environment. And that's something. I mean, one reason to eat less beef is to help the environment. Because in cultures, like in some cultures around the world, like in the United States, Portugal, Argentina, some cultures, they just, over the last 100 years, they developed this culture where just they eat an insane amount of beef, and it's not healthy. It causes a lot of health problems, and it's not healthy for the individual, and it's also really bad for the environment. Um, I mean, another way cattle production and production of beef contributes to the environment. Also to feed cows, to get enough calories to to nourish one from beef, it's an incredibly inefficient way to use the Earth's resources to create calories to feed people, right? I'll show you some graphs about it in the second half of the section, in the second half of the session. But cattle production to feed large beef-eating societies around the world are leading to cutting down more and more forests. Like famously, cutting down Amazon forest to grow corn and soybeans to feed cattle. There's a huge thing also in Asia. There's cutting down rainforest in Asia as well. Yeah. So, and then of course also His Holiness, even though His Holiness is not pure vegetarian, he usually says that he did try to become a vegetarian earlier in his life, I think in his 20s or 30s, and for a year or more, he went without eating any meat whatsoever. But then he felt like his immune system got weaker, and then he got tuberculosis. Um, and then at that time, when he had tuberculosis, which is really serious disease, right? The doctors told him, no, it's better you eat meat. So he says he still eats meat, but in small quantities, no, not in huge quantities. And I think that's something, I think for many people, it's very difficult to totally go without meat, especially if you've grown up eating meat, or some people's constitution is such that it's just difficult, right? Um, but but there's a big difference between eating small amounts of meat that you feel like helps sustain your health, versus just eating like big steaks and eating just a hamburger whenever you feel like it, and eating like large quantities of meat in the way that so many people do, just out of attachment, basically. And that you see among Tibetan culture. I mean, having lived with the Tibetans in a monastery in India for years, I see that, yeah, most of the monks, they grow up eating meat. I mean, they're from a nomadic families or farm families. It's very much part of their culture, and they're very attached to their kind of cultural identity. So they have very difficult time giving it up. But most, they eat in quite small quantities. They eat. They put some meat in tukpa or something occasionally for a celebration. They make like meat momos or something like that. But it's not like they eat huge quantities of meat like you see in the US. And that's common in India. I'll show you another graph about meat consumption in India compared to consumption of meat like in America. It's just shocking, like the difference. It's just like night and day. Um, um, and then I think finally, well, let me just think through His Holiness other um, well, also there's this, yeah, I mean, I guess I've covered this already, but maybe just to phrase it in a bit more the way His Holiness does, is just the idea of universal responsibility. Relating this idea that, we're all responsible for each other. We all are interconnected with each other as a human species and as living beings on the earth. Like His Holiness mentions again and again. Actually, His Holiness has a book. Let me see if I can. Oh, actually, I was looking at it on my iPad. I don't have it here. But he published in 2020 a book called something like One World, Universal Responsibility for a Better Planet or something. But together with I think it's a German journalist, Franz Alt, they published a book together about, it's a very short book, His Holiness message for, the importance of, especially at this time, for protecting our natural environment, as out of also for just the ethical reason that we all, as an interconnected people, share this. So, but His Holiness uses this phrase, our blue planet, right? Thinking about, when you see, and there's something called the overview effect, which apparently many astronauts, people who actually go into outer space and see the planet from like the International Space Station or further away, that it very very powerfully affects their mind, their understanding of like what we are in space. When you see, imagine this vast, space that's, millions, if not billions of light, I think billions of light years across, right? It's 13 billion years since the Big Bang. And our galaxy is kind of on one side of the universe. So, yeah, the oldest light known is like, yeah, approaching 12, 13 billion years old, which means it's been traveling for that long until it's reached us, right? If when we observe it, it's that old. It's been traveling for that long. So anyway, the universe is like billions of light years across, which is just kind of, it's difficult to fathom like that distance. And most of that, well, until now, as far as we know, it's inhabitable space. No, and then within within that, there's this, this our one tiny planet. Not that there might be other inhabited planets, but this one tiny planet that happens to have water and oxygen, and the conditions for life, and then life has developed, and then plants have developed, and then the soils, and then and it's developed in kind of a long and stable enough way that now we have humans, right? Which just have incredibly sophisticated nervous system and ability to think and minds, right? Of course, Buddhism doesn't accept that consciousness developed exclusively on the basis of a nervous system. That's a longer story, but the existence of humans and animals, like in the universe, is something extremely fragile and unlikely and rare, right? And I think when people get that view, this overview effect, the view of the planet Earth from a distance. Also, Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan famously requested, I think it was the Viking probe. There was one probe that was sent by NASA to, I think, to Mars or something like that, someplace very far away. And he asked that at some point it be turned towards the Earth and take a photo of the Earth. Yeah, of the Earth. And it's just, this photos is this huge black space with this little blue dot now in it. And it's like that's us. We feel like, oh, we're so so different and alien and something different, separate, and unconnected from people in China or Africa or Russia or something. But actually, we're all just inhabitants of this very small planet that we share together. So, and His Holiness' idea of universal responsibility is, keep that in mind and try to cultivate that attitude of, think globally, act locally. We're all part of one global community, which is an idea that's very much taken root, more and more, especially since the the conclusion of the two world wars and the formation of like these global governing bodies like the United Nations, and then more and more global agreements and accords like the Paris Climate Accord. Um, and that's, I mean, that's an excellent development, right, in human society. This kind of more and more shared universal or global thinking. But as individuals, we have to cultivate that, within ourselves, and thereby um, be a positive influence for those we come into contact with through directly or by our speech or by writing or by our work that we do, the way we consume, the way we invest, and so forth. Um, yeah. So His Holiness encourages us to think about ourselves as sharing this one inhabitable planet together, and having sort of developing universal responsibility for others. Mm. And I think, and then one thing you can add also, and this is maybe, maybe it's not so much a message that relates to anybody, regardless of their religious background, but especially from a Buddhist point of view, as especially as Mahayana Buddhists in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, like every sentient being has a potential for full enlightenment, the potential to eliminate all faults of, especially of their mind, and cultivate all positive qualities of the mind. But as we know, to do that, like to meditate, requires like a peaceful place, right? A place where and a kind of situation in life where, okay, you have water, you have food, you have shelter, you don't have to worry about being attacked by by criminals or something like that. You're healthy, and then when those the conditions of sustenance in life are fulfilled, then then we can meditate very easily for beginners. For advanced practitioners, maybe it doesn't matter, right? But for us beginners, like, you need a peaceful environment to cultivate, to be able to just have the leisure and the time to look at your own mind and understand more the workings of one mind and reduce and eliminate the causes of anger, attachment, jealousy, selfishness and arrogant pride and so forth, and to cultivate the opposites, right? The positive qualities of humility, and altruistic concern for others and loving kindness and compassion, and especially wisdom. Like wisdom is very difficult to cultivate, and not to mention mental focus, right? So to to be able to cultivate our potential for lasting well-being and happiness, up to complete freedom from suffering, liberation from samsara, and the perfect development of all our positive potential. It requires a very clean and peaceful environment. Um, it's very difficult, like just to do breathing meditation. If the air, like, I've stayed in Delhi. I really try to avoid Delhi. Like it's so polluted, the air, and also Kathmandu is so polluted, the air, and then there's so much noise. It's almost impossible to meditate there. I mean, it's no, what is it? Um, Coincidence that yogis would go, into the mountains to meditate or by the seashore or something or in the forest. Because just you go in a forest and there's so much oxygen coming from the trees and the dust is so, there's not much dust because, all the earth is covered with growth, leaves and organic matter. And there's so many trees. There's moisture and it's cool. The temperature is modulated, right? So it really helps to have like a flourishing natural environment for spiritual practice. Um, yeah. Also, I mean, because spiritual practice, you're working with like subtle energies, right? So if to again to meditate in a place where there's a lot of pollution, there's a lot of destruction, like it's been mined or something, or a lot of trees have been destroyed or cut down, or it's just a feeling that it brings like a harsh feeling to the mind. Like people don't care about, like caring is kind of, it's a subtle thing, right? Whereas just to destroy and cut down things and use it selfish purposes is a very kind of coarse, and coarse and harsh thing, right? Which brings a harshness to the mind. So um, I think, um, and maybe this is me speaking personally more, is like one thing that I think is really important to bring to the discussion about how to protect the environment is, um, I mean, a general thing is not only me. It's just that we need to think not only what we shouldn't be doing, but what we should do. Like, what is our ideal for the future as a human family inhabiting Earth and sharing it with countless other animals and plants? Like, what would be an ideal situation in the way we inhabit the earth and the kind of environment we created. Like the friend I was just with, he knows actually a lot more about people in the contemporary conservation movement than I do. But he was saying there's this one author, maybe Rob Hopkins, because there was actually a conference on the Buddhism and the environment at Jamyang Center in London last year, I think. Um, but this Rob Hopkins, I believe it's him. But anyway, he was saying we should be aiming to like basically put half of the Earth's land mass in like national parks, make it preserved land that humans don't inhabit. Just set it aside for the animals, which is like, oh wow, it sounds radical, but actually it's not. It's very feasible, right? To do, and how wonderful that would be. I mean, California is probably pretty close to that already. I don't know. I never looked up how much, what percent of California. I mean, definitely, I've never been in an environment, I mean, in an area, or I've never lived in an area where there's so much preserved land as here. Like here in the Bay Area, there's so much. I look at the maps a lot, like to figure out where to go on my next hike. But there's so much preserved land, like just on the peninsula from here down to Santa Cruz. Like probably, I would say at least a quarter, if not a third land is either state parks or open space preserve or county parks or some other coastal preserve. Like every time I go for a hike, I feel like I learn about not only a new place to go hiking, but a new type of preserved land, right? a new category of preserved land, because obviously people in this area really care about that. It's something they hold dear, and so they've made that happen. And that's something I think we need to try to promote. We should try to promote, every place in the world and make. But it's so valuable to have to create an example that other people can look to. Otherwise, it's just an idea. When you just tell people about an idea, but you have no concrete example of that, that's very difficult to convince people that that's worthy. But if you invite people to an area where, for example, half the land is preserved, is set aside for just the wild, basically, and wild animals, then they experience how wonderful it is, what it's like. Like one example, I guess that this author, I'm sorry, I don't have his name for sure, but he pointed out there's this town in Germany where for whatever reason, they had the opportunity to totally reorganize the kind of town ordinances and organization of a town. But they made the town so it's completely powered by renewable energy. Actually, I heard Gavin Newsom say the other day, something like 5 days of the week, California as a state is powered by renewable energy now. There's so much. Um, but this town in Germany, so the town's completely powered by renewable energy, and they made all the streets car auto free. Cars can only park on the outskirts of the town, and all the streets within the town, there's no vehicles, only bicycles and walking. And he's saying one effect that people never really thought about, is that it's so much quieter. The quality of life is improved so much just because on one end it's just quieter, right? There's not the sound of vehicle traffic like through the town all the time. Um, and you could hear things. I think that's what he was saying. You could hear subtle things that, like the sound of people's silverware clacking against the plates and stuff like that. These small sounds that, when there's so much vehicle traffic around, it just washes out. You can't hear anymore. And then, of course, birds and animals and things. So, but I think, yeah, I mean, this is all kind of coming from this point that I think uniquely, I mean, each religion has its idea of what a utopia would look like, what a perfect world would look like. But as Buddhists, I think it's important we try to think about that, because we even have this idea of a pure land, right? And that's what when we offer mandala, like at the beginning of this, we say, imagining all this as a pure land, I offer it. And so that's kind of an expression of, well, what do we aspire to? Not only in future lives, but in this life, or maybe not. I mean, because change happens, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. But like 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, or 200 or 500 years from now, like what would the planet Earth, what would an ideal planet Earth look like? Um, and I think, yeah, I mean, one is just, of course, clean air, clean water, um, more silence, renewable energy, less kind of pollution in the water and air and so forth, and people living in harmony where everyone has kind of feels abundance, right? Has an abundance of shelter and food, water, education, and leisure and time and energy, right? So how do we work towards that? What are things we can do, practically to work towards that, even in our thinking, in our speech, in our physical actions? Uh, let's take a 5-minute break now, and then in the second half, I'll show you some information, and then if you have any comments or questions, or we can meditate a little bit. Okay, 5-minute break.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. What's your name? Yeah, thank you for joining, letting us know. Okay, so before we continue the discussion, I thought to share a few facts with you, because it's always good to know about facts. And especially, yeah, I think, well, especially because, I mean, we're all living in the United States, right? We're citizens of the United States. And I mean, honestly, when we look at the whole global climate crisis, the main thing is, the use of natural resources, like using more natural resources than is sustainable. And then within that, especially fossil fuels, so thereby putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But then also, like I mentioned, the creation of plastics is another huge problem. Um, and then of course, industrialization, of course, uses fossil fuels, carbon dioxide, and also emits, and creates plastics. And then the emission of, and then the way we use the land, right? The way we use land. So I just wanted to show you some facts about, well, basically the point is, before I show these, the point is that I think as citizens of the United States, we have a special responsibility actually to work towards a solution, because we are an outsized part of the problem. Not necessarily us individual, but as a country, like on average, we've polluted the world like more than any other country, and on a per capita basis, more than any other population, like by far, right? So let's just look at the numbers for a bit. And I don't mean to make you feel like bad or guilty or something, but it's helpful just to know about the facts. So this, yeah, this is actually slides I made for another presentation a couple years ago, but I'll show you. This is a couple quotes from His Holiness there. So let's start here. So this, I'm drawing mostly from this website called Our World in Data, which, have any of you heard of that? Our World in Data, the website. Did I probably mention it? Yeah, anyway, it's an excellent website where they draw data from the UN and other and different government agencies, of each country. And then you can ask, search it, ask any question, and it'll give you relevant data. And then you can make up your own graphs and charts easily, and compare information from basically any country in the world that publishes data, right? So here's one, and energy use per person, right? And this is from 1965 to 2022. So I chose these countries to compare. So India at the bottom, and then, so look at India's, for example, from 1965 until 2022, the amount of energy they use on average per person so they started, I don't know, looks like maybe, I don't know, 5,000 kilowatts or something, because there's zero kilowatts to kilowatt hours to 20,000, and they're way at the bottom. And then they just gradually increase, and now they're, up at that much. It's hardly any. Then a little bit more is Brazil. A little bit more is China, right? So China's it's quite low. Then Europe is a bit more, but look at Europe. They started off kind of, say it's like 30,000 kilowatt hours per person, and then they went up a little bit, and then they've gradually gone down to about 38,000. But look at the United States. There's so much more energy per person, all the way from 1965. I was shocked. All the way in 1965, that's, what is it? That's 20 years after World War II ended. So maybe that's why, because Europe, why it's so different than Europe, because Europe was totally destroyed in World War II. And so even in 1965, they're still kind of rebuilding, whereas the US just totally industrialized in World War II and then kept going, right? But this is per person, energy use per person, right? The US in 1965 already started at, what is that, like 78,000 kilowatt hours per person, then went way up, then came down. I think that was like the 70s, this huge inflation and kind of financial crash. And then went up a bit, and then it's been slowly coming down since about 2002, right? But still, compared to the rest of the world, it's so much more, right? It's just stark, right? Energy use per person. So that's one thing, as an individual, we can think about, well, how can I use less energy, right? I feel like I've been living in India 20 years, so I've done my part. Like the rest of my life, I can kind of live free and easy a bit, but no. But yeah, but now I live at Vajrapani Institute, where we're off grid. No, all our electricity comes from solar. Yeah. And we use very little water, largely because we don't have flush toilets. We use outhouse. It saves huge amount of water. Okay, then cumulative CO. So this is cumulative as an entire country. Cumulative CO2 emissions, right? Yeah, cumulative emissions are the running sum of CO. So this is the running sum of CO2 emissions produced from fossil fuels and in industry since 1750, like land use changes not included. So it starts at 1750 and goes up to 2021. So again, look, 1750, we're all the same, right? 1850s, we start to become a bit different. The UK is top there, right, in 1850, because they industrialized first. Then by 1900, I don't know, the UK is still top, but the Europe is catching up quickly. The US is still a bit less in 1900. By 1950, the US is the most, right? Cumulative. Europe a bit less, UK less, but still like India, Canada, South Africa, Brazil, China, they're all so little, right? And then you look now, I mean, look now since the even early, even, yeah, 1950, the US has been on this massive trajectory, as has Europe. China only, its trajectory upwards only started really in like, say, 1960s, 70s, and it's been really steep, more steep than the US or Europe. But by far, who's contributed the most CO2? I mean, the US by so much more than all of Europe, right? Not to mention China. Yeah, China's getting up there now, but the US is just phenomenally a lot more, right? How many billions more? Europe is about almost at 300 billion.
How does population play into this graph? Because, for example, Canada is the same population approximately as California.
Well, this is a cumulative, right?
Yeah.
So for the entire country. So if you divide it by population, then you get a per capita, right?
This is not a per capita.
No. This is cumulative.
So I'm just saying,
right?
Canada would probably be
I think
quite a
this.
bit up there if you
Let's
did
see.
it per capita.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. Yeah, maybe. I mean, they have to do a lot more heating in the winter, right? Here's per capita. Here's per capita greenhouse gas emissions, right? To your point. So where's Canada? Canada, I don't have here. I didn't put them in. Sometimes Canada gets forgotten. Yeah, but again, start at the bottom. Look at India per capita. It's not much different now than it was in like 1850. You know, it's so low. Because like Indians most don't have a car. Most don't, yeah, they're all getting cars, but most don't have now still, you know. Most like they walk or have a motorcycle, right? Most don't have air conditioning. They don't use heating in the winter. Even in Dharamsala, I mean, if you've been at Tushita in the winter, it's very difficult because there's no heating. It's so cold, right? Yeah, and then they're just way less industrialized in general, right? So, yeah. And then, so next to India is the world. This is the world average, right? Again, that's just kind of gradually gone up. It's coming down a little bit, but then next to that is Europe, because Europe's done so well with, becoming more green. It's come down so much since the 90s. Look how much it's come down of Europe. So that's kind of what's possible. There should be kind of a role model. China's gone up. So just since 2000, look how much it's gone up, right? Brazil's kind of, it's kind of all over the place, up and down. But since 2000, it's come dramatically down. From this peak, the sharp peak in 2000, it's come down. The US has come down also, but still it's just so much higher than everyone else's, right? This is per capita greenhouse emissions. So the US is just like off the charts now. Look at the space. I mean, the whole way. From 1850 already, it was way more. I don't know how that is in 1850. Yeah, I have no idea. But even since like 1960, look, until now, it went way up. And then it's way higher than everyone else. And then everyone from 2000 is coming down, except China is going up. But as the per capita. But but like Africa wants to go up. India, people want to go up a lot more, right? US is coming down, but still it's so much more than everyone else. Okay, then not to spend too much time. Then plastics. Plastic waste generation. So the darker the blue is the more plastic waste. This is total plastic waste. This is not per capita, this is total. US, again, is just a huge amount. It's US and China are comparable. China, because I mean, they produce everything for the whole world, right? But yeah, U.S. And then what's this one? What's the next one? Oh yeah, here's the per capita, per person, average amount of plastic daily plastic waste generation per person daily. So the U.S. 0.34 kilograms per day we produce on average, right? This is I don't know, I don't have a year here, but it's it's 2015. This was published. United Kingdom is significantly less. Brazil is less, about half what we do. China is less than that. Canada, so there's Canada, much less than us.
Yeah, that's interesting because they have such a similar lifestyle. It's just
Yeah.
in India, they're like
Look at
crazy for
India.
plastic.
It's like nothing, yeah.
But it seems like they have
Well,
less.
because they don't manage the plastic, because it's spread all over the ground, right? That's why. They do. Sometimes it's so sad. Sometimes in the early morning you drive and you see people burning a pile of plastic by the side of the road to keep warm. Like, how unhealthy. Yeah, and the cows, yeah. It's just, they don't manage it well, right? Yeah. And then here's how they manage plastic. I mean, in the US, we manage our plastic fairly well. It mostly ends up in landfills. But I mean, if that's managed well, right? If you can call that managed well. But look at this is plastic waste by disposal. This is in the world on average. It's not any country. So in the world, like, let's see. So about, I mean, this is from 2000 to 2019. So in 2000, look, about half of our plastic ends up in landfills. And then about 20% is mismanaged, which means it's just in the waterways or thrown on the ground or it's just or burned. Yeah, it pollutes the environment basically. And then about 20% is incinerated. Like in Singapore, they incinerate all their plastic, and then they make artificial islands out of it, but in a very clean way. I mean, they're very clean, right? There's a clean. I know, but I think you can scrub the smoke and whatever you contain. And then how much of it is, this is the main point though, how much of it is littered, is recycled? It's like 5% maybe of plastic is recycled. So this idea that most of our plastic is recycled is just like not.
And even if it's recycled,
That's not the
they
case.
only recycle it once. It's a total joke.
Right.
Plastic.
Yeah. And then the final slide, or well, I'll show a bit. So this is, yeah, actually, maybe I'll skip this one. Well, just look, this is land use. So this first here is the global land use for food production. So look at the Earth's surface, 25 on the surface of Earth, 29% land and 71% ocean. Right, the ocean we don't know how to use for food production so well yet. But of the 29% that's land, 71% is habitable, and then 10% glaciers and 19% barren land. Of the habitable land, 50% is used for agriculture, 30% is forest, 11% shrubs, and so forth, right? So already of the habitable land, we already use 50% for agriculture. Of that, though, this is where it gets shocking. Of that agriculture land, agriculture land, 77% is used for livestock, meat, and dairy. 23% is used for crops. So that livestock, so this includes grazing land for animals and arable land used for animal feed production. So that 77% used for livestock, meat, and dairy, it means the land that we use to grow crops to feed animals. So like the vast majority, like 3/4 of the agricultural land we use is just to feed animals. And then look at the global calorie supply. That 77% use of agricultural land to feed animals leads to 18% of the calorie supply. That's the major inefficiency, like right there. It's like totally, this right here. It's totally inefficient use of land, right? To use 77% of agricultural land to provide 18% of the global calorie supply, right? Whereas, all right, now I have to find my eraser. There it is. Okay. Not to mention the suffering of all the animals, not to mention pollution of the environment. Yeah, exactly. Every day we're just slaughtering animals as if like they don't have feelings. They don't have suffering, whereas they do, right? Yeah, it's a crime, right? And then, so, but here, 23% of the crop, so 23% of the agricultural land we use produces, so this is for, vegetarian diet, produces 83% of plant-based food, right? So clearly we can use a lot less. If we had a more vegetarian diet, we would reduce animal suffering a lot, and also we could, provide a lot more food for people, right? Yeah. So that I wanted to point out. Okay, I have to close this, I think. How do I do this? Here. Okay. And then, yeah, per capita. So here, the per capita meat consumption. And this is by country. The United States. Top is United States, equal with Portugal. Slightly less is Spain. And then India is way down here. Ethiopia is there. The world average is here, right? Right down here. The world average is third from the bottom. So the United States, and this is in 2020, per capita meat consumption. So how much, I think it's in a year. Yeah, so in 1 year, the average person in the US eats 149 kilograms of meat, right? Most of that is poultry, 58 grams poultry, 48 kilograms poultry, 37 kilograms beef, and then pork, and then fish. So about 149 kilograms is average in the US. And then, yeah, these other countries close. China is about, is it a third less? Again, India is almost like so little compared. But the world average is 63 kilograms, right? So in the US, we eat almost 3 times, more than double the world average of meat consumption per capita, right? And then here, so if the world were to adopt, so this graph, it's a bit complicated, but to make it simple, it's basically showing at the bottom is the per capita beef consumption, and then on the left, the index is the amount of the habitable land we would have to use if the entire world adopted that diet, right? So the idea is that, like, say, here's the United States. If the entire world adopted the average United States diet, like, how much of the global land would we have to use to provide that? Would be about 140%, which means it's impossible, right? There's only 100% of the land to use, right? So if the average, in the world, everyone were to adopt the average US diet, it'd be totally unsustainable. Actually, I mean, you think about currently we use 50% of the habitable land for agriculture. And so kind of below that is, if we don't want to use more of our land for agriculture, we have to adopt the diet of, like, India, the Philippines, China, Japan, right? Which eat, who eat like 1/4 of the amount of beef that we do, right? So all these countries up here, like if you take 100% and more, all of these, if the world were to adopt the diet, I mean, the amount of, mainly it's not just the diet, it's the beef consumption, per capita beef consumption. Were to eat as much beef as they eat, then, we'd have to use more than 100% of the land's habitable, arable land, farmable land to support that, right? Yeah, so that's that. Okay, that's all.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Thank you.
I remember too, I had to look it up, but it's 1,500.
Yeah.
1 pound of
Yeah. 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 So much water to produce beef. Yeah. Yeah.
showers and all that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
Talk about that in the
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
People were attacking, using the same thing to attack soybeans, boiling soybeans.
Mhm.
It uses tons of water.
Almonds too.
Almonds.
Almonds use immense.
Use the same
California.
Hmm.
argument
Yeah.
of vegetarian.
Yeah. Or even if you can't be vegetarian, like I said, just eat less meat. No?
Yeah.
I mean, however much less you eat, you contribute to less, slaughter of animals, and less pollution of the environment. Right?
A lot of countries use it more like a garnish. you know,
Mhm.
than as a Shaolin too, you know.
Mhm.
Use one piece of meat, cut it up, slice it, stir fry, cook that.
Mhm.
And then you put cardiologist on.
Are you a cardiologist? Yeah. But also, I think sometimes we get too caught up in like, oh, I have to, this kind of guilt, like, oh, I have to do this and do that, do that. Whereas, I mean, a lot of the changes really need at the level of government policy and industrial norms and things like that. So it's really important, like who you vote, to vote in governments that will adopt green policies, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna say too about health for education.
Mm-hmm.
So that kids, they grow, understand home.
On a backseat driver's seat.
I think this is actually working
Mm-hmm.
today. No, I was just talking about education and using this, for children to, new next generations to understand that with small changes, we could really reverse so much damage to the environment, to
Mm-hmm.
our planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one nice example of that I saw was I went hiking in Saratoga Quarry Park. There was a big quarry just behind Saratoga, and I don't know. There's pictures of it in the 1950s, 60s. It was just a huge hillside that was just quarried. It was totally stripped bare. I don't know what, for gravel or something. And now it's a park. I don't know for how long it's been a park, but it's almost like you couldn't tell that it was ever quarried. It just looks like a totally natural environment now. I mean, nature very quickly regenerates, and heals itself.
Yeah, that's like we did here at Chrissy Field.
Hmm. Touche.
We've had some great projects here in San Francisco like that, where we have reclaimed and reestablished natural systems in the city.
Hmm.
But the kids, the San Francisco public school, they are educating children about diet. Even my son, who's 27 now, when he was in elementary school, they were teaching them about diet,
Hmm.
food, nutrition, and now they are, teaching them about everything. It's pretty holistic.
Hmm.
Yeah, more than our time.
Hmm. Yeah, why do you think in this area, in the Bay Area, there's so much preserved land? So many people seem to, for many years, have seemed to make that a priority.
I came here from the East Coast. I moved here from the East Coast, and it just, because it was settled later, there was more of a chance to set aside land.
Hmm.
That's my thought,
Hmm.
anyway. Anybody else?
Hmm.
No, I think I'd probably agree with that. Just because, yeah, from the East Coast, just
Hmm.
history and here,
Yeah.
and it's also a different terrain in terms of habitation too. You have these steep mountains coming up out of it, so that's not all have the same way.
Right. Yeah, that's true too. There's a lot of mountains. Yeah.
But for example, most of the redwood trees are gone, and the only ones they didn't take were the ones like, for example, your woods, where it was so steep they couldn't get to them.
Hmm.
So at one time, California was considered the most environmentally destroyed place on the planet because of gold mining
Ah.
and all
Hmm.
the commercial farming and
Hmm.
livestock. I
Hmm.
don't know if we still are that, but at one
Hmm.
time it was considered that, because we got
Hmm.
rid of all kinds of wildlife is gone.
Hmm.
Entire environments in the Central Valley were completely changed.
Hmm.
So anyway,
Hmm.
I mean, we have preserved a lot of land, but we've also really messed up the environment
Hmm.
here.
I think in SoCal, I've seen pictures of SoCal from like the 1950s, and like the hillsides behind were just barren. They're just like grass fields, no trees. But now it's covered with trees and forests now, completely covered. So also when I was hiking in Nepal recently, in the area around Everest Base Camp in Laudo, the Venerable Sarah, we went for pilgrimage there recently. She was saying when she first came there, like 30 years ago, there was hardly any trees because the people had all cut them down for wood. But then they made it a national park, and so protect you can't made it illegal to cut down trees, and now it's covered with forests just within 30 years. So it's nice to see examples of that, places that had been kind of stripped bare and how kind of miserable, empty it looks, and then see it preserved and how quickly, forests grow up again. Yeah, and forests are such huge carbon sinks. No.
Exactly. I was going to say the same thing that, a lot of we've damaged a lot of land by cultivating.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many ways to, like regenerate and to sequester the carbon um, in terms of, if we start applying this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how quickly it can change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I notice oftentimes when I go hike in a state park or something here, if there's a sign, oftentimes there's signs about like how it started. And oftentimes it's with one person. It's like one person used to come and hike in this area and then they love it so much. And then maybe they came into money or they met someone and then they decided to buy a parcel of it. And then other people like the idea and other people join. And then gradually they just buy up or somehow designate this area as a preserved area. Like many things, they just start with one person's kind of real love of that area. So I think it's also helpful to see those kind of stories where one person can make a real difference and lead others if they have a good idea how to change things in a positive way or preserve the environment for the future. Like how, yeah. So we can each how one person can make a lot of difference. Sure. But it requires people working together. Then they talk. You have to talk to other people. No, have to communicate with other people. That's why also His Holiness uses his kind of his role as a public figure for this, because he thinks the environment is a really important issue. Like there's a lot of other things he could be talking about, right? But he really uses his role as a public figure to try to encourage people to treat the environment with more more respect and more concern and understanding. Mm. Um, I don't know. What do you think? Should we do a little meditation or end early so people can go to the No Kings March? Yeah, yeah, we could do. Yeah. Okay, we'll do a short meditation. Let's do that. Yeah, I think I'd like to do a meditation where we kind of imagine or visualize like a positive future, an ideal future and what that would look like. But yeah, sit comfortably. Prepare to sit comfortably still for a few minutes, 10 minutes or so. And then gradually focus your awareness within and turn your attention to an object of placement meditation for a minute or two, just to clear the mind and generate some mental focus. Mm. So then reflecting on initially, or first, reflecting on His Holiness example of, his understanding or his understanding of himself as someone from this unique um, environment of Tibet, and also as just a global citizen and as a Buddhist practitioner, then having a sense of responsibility to address um, this important issue of protecting the natural environment or using the natural environment wisely and sustainably. Then we can, for each of us ourselves, can we find a similar pattern? We can ask ourselves, is there a similar pattern in my own life where I can see how I've depended upon a certain environment, um, or had a certain experiences, different experiences with the natural environment, such that I feel I have a responsibility to protect, or also in dependence upon one's relationship to Buddhism and one's Buddhist practice. Does that communicate a responsibility to care for the natural environment? Mm. And then let's imagine for a moment, for a few minutes, what would be an ideal future in our as a at the local level or at the global level or national level. So as human societies, in the way we care for the environment and the way we transform our use of the natural environment. So try to imagine like 25 years from now or 50 years from now or even 100 years from now. What would be some ideal ways that we um, co-inhabit the earth and our local regions? What would that look like in different ways? Mm. And then finally, let's consider for a few minutes what are some things that we can do to work towards, personally. We can ask ourselves, what can I do to help contribute towards bringing this about, this ideal future about? What are things oneself can do to work towards that? Mm. And then finally, we can dedicate thinking about whatever virtue we've created in this session, whatever wholesome intentions we've had, then and whatever virtuous actions we've engaged in, we can rejoice for ourselves and others, and especially think of all the other, sentient beings like ourselves, especially people like ourselves throughout the world who are similarly concerned about the environment and have the welfare of all beings in mind, and all the, so many good things people are engaged in to help resolve the climate crisis and the problems of pollution of the environment, destruction of the natural environment. So we can rejoice in all of their countless actions. And especially dedicate that by the force of whatever virtue there is, may we and all other sentient beings um, more and more reduce our harm of the natural environment and pollution of the natural environment, and increase more and more our responsible relationship to and sustainable use of the environment, and our promotion of our contribution to solutions to the crisis that we face now. And may all of this become a cause for the happiness and well-being of all sentient beings and contribute to their enlightenment, eventual freedom from suffering and full enlightenment. Mm. And especially all those who, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and other world leaders and local leaders, and all beings who contribute, who make a significant impact and have leadership or have the potential to have leadership in this sphere. May they have long and stable lives and their voices be heard by all. And especially, maybe it's good to dedicate may all the spiritual traditions, Islam and Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism, may they all have more and more have unified and prominent voices expressing the need to cherish and preserve our global environment and use it in a way that's beneficial for all human beings and all the animals. And then bring to mind any other prayers and dedications you'd like to make. So may all those your own prayers also be fulfilled in accordance with your wholesome intentions. Okay, let's conclude there today. Thank you all for your participation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my pleasure.